Good day, grade 11 learners. Welcome to this Life Sciences lesson. My name is Shabnam Sukhnandan. This lesson is brought to you by the Sci-Bono Discovery Center in collaboration with the Gauteng Department of Education. So learners, today we're going to be focusing on gaseous exchange, and this topic is very important because there are some aspects of gaseous exchange that you would need to know for matric next year. So please, it's very important that you understand this topic well, and also it carries a large mark allocation in your paper, right? This will fall under your grade 11 paper 2. So therefore, you must make notes as we are going along and understand the questions and the answers that's related to the questions. So first of all, learners, there is a very big difference between gaseous exchange, breathing and respiration. So most people confuse the three terms, but they are actually similar but very, very different in terms of the processes. So if you look at breathing, breathing is a mechanism, right, whereby it's a process involving the taking in of air and the taking out of air from the lungs. So breathing, you can see a person breathing. So let's say a person is sleeping, right, but you're not sure now. The person's not snoring, you can't hear them breathing, but now you want to know, is the person alive? But you can see the movement of maybe the blank of the person is moving slightly up and down, because breathing is a mechanical process. And the most important thing is it's a mechanical process of taking oxygen into the lungs and getting rid of carbon dioxide, not from the lungs but from the body, you see. So what is actually gaseous exchange? It's a mechanical process, okay? It's a mechanical process involving the taking in of oxygen from the air into the lungs and the removal of carbon dioxide from the body through the lungs. Mechanical process of taking in oxygen from the air into the lungs and the removal of carbon dioxide from the body out of the lungs, which we call inhalation and exhalation. So breathing involves two processes, inhalation and exhalation, and we're going to do this much deeper in the next lesson of gaseous exchange. So today we're just going to do the basics, show you the structures and the functions, and next week we go into the deeper chemical process of gaseous exchange. So breathing is an inhalation and exhalation process. It's mechanical, involving in taking in of oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide from the body via the lungs. So the lungs is the main organ responsible for gaseous exchange. Then we come across a word called cellular respiration. Now the word cellular is very important because it indicates that this process of respiration occurs not at the lung surface but at a cellular surface, a small cell. Okay, so here now, this process, you cannot see it with the naked eye. You cannot see the physical process of you can see the process of inhalation and exhalation, but you cannot see respiration. So therefore, it's a chemical process. So the cellular respiration is a chemical process which takes place in the cells to release energy. And here you can see that what is the chemical process? You can see a glucose molecule, which you remember it was made by photosynthesis in plants. Yes, that glucose that we take in as food, it's going to be carried by the blood to the cells, and at the cell, there's a cell. At the cell now, there is something very important, learners, and that is called the mitochondria. Okay, so this is a cell, and in our cell, there is what we call a mitochondria. Okay, and in this mitochondria, that's where the process of cellular respiration is going to occur. Where? In the mitochondria, which we call the powerhouse of the cell, right? And that power is what? is the energy that's being released. So everything you do, the picking up of your bag, just the brushing of your teeth, just the movement of your head, the walking as you walk, all those processes require energy. And where is that energy coming from? You didn't fill yourself with petrol. You do not have batteries. Okay, so where is that energy coming from? It's coming from the breakdown of glucose in your mitochondria. But what else do you need to break down the glucose and release energy? You need in your mitochondria glucose, yes, but also the oxygen that we inhaled. And you can see this process here. When you breathe in, your lungs will inflate, and this is like a balloon representing your lungs. And when you breathe out, exhalation, your lungs will deflate like a balloon deflating, and CO2 moves out. Can you see that? Here oxygen is moving in, and here CO2 is moving out. That's breathe in, breathe out. It's a physical process, it's a mechanical process. Whereas respiration is a chemical process involving the breakdown of glucose using oxygen to release energy. And where does it occur? It occurs in the mitochondria. So do you understand the slide, learners? So let's summarize. Every time we do a slide, let's summarize. Breathing is a mechanical process. It involves inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation means taking in of oxygen from the air into the lungs. Exhalation means the removal of carbon dioxide from the lungs to the air. Okay, so that's breathing in. It's involving the lungs and muscles. Cellular respiration occurs at a cellular surface, and this means, what does this mean? It means that respiration is a chemical process occurring in the mitochondria of a cell, whereby the glucose that comes to the cell will be broken down with the oxygen that you've inhaled. And what does it do? It releases energy. Okay, so here is gaseous exchange now. It's a physical process which involves the diffusion of oxygen from the lungs to the blood to the cells, and carbon dioxide from the cells to the blood, and blood to the lungs. So gases are being exchanged. Can you see that? But so gaseous exchange, breathing is a mechanical process. Now what is gaseous exchange? Remember we said breathing. We spoke about breathing. We said it's mechanical, involving inhalation and exhalation. We spoke about respiration, which occurs at the cellular surface, releasing energy using the oxygen that we inhaled. And now we're talking about what? Gaseous exchange. And as the word says, we are exchanging gases. And how do we exchange the gases? The oxygen from the air is then taken into the lungs, right? Now from the lungs, it must go to the, see, it's exchange, moving through. It's diffusing from the lungs to the blood. Now the blood is going to take the oxygen to the cells, and then it's exchanged to the cells. And from the cells, it undergoes what? Cellular respiration. The oxygen is going to be used for cellular respiration. And after cellular respiration, what's going to be released? Carbon dioxide is going to be released, and it's going to move from your cells to the blood. Then your blood is going to take that carbon dioxide to your lungs, and you're going to exhale it. Can you see that? So all these processes occur as just for the process for your cells to be alive. You've got to first breathe in the oxygen. Then that oxygen is going to be metabolized by breaking down glucose in your cells to release energy. That's respiration. And after that respiration, CO2 or carbon dioxide is going to be released, and it's going to be exchanged now from the cells to the blood. Then it's going to be exchanged from the blood to the lungs.
In progress.
And the lungs will exhale it. So it's an integrated process, okay? So respiration, breathing, and gaseous exchange work together. It works together to ensure that the oxygen that we inhale is doing its job to give our body energy to work. Our brains can think, our heart can pump, our muscles can walk. So where are they getting the energy from? They're getting the energy from oxygen. So our lungs are very, very important, learners. They play a vital role. Without the lungs, we would die. So you cannot stay without oxygen for 4 minutes, because if you don't breathe in oxygen, your cells won't be able to use oxygen for respiration. There'll be no energy, and within 4 minutes, all the organs will die. So respiration is very important. It releases energy with the breakdown of glucose and oxygen to give you energy, and then the carbon dioxide that's released from the glucose and after respiration cannot stay in the body. It must be exhaled, and that's how our bodies can function normally. Now let's look at this little picture or diagram to actually show you exactly what's happening. So here you can see the blood capillaries. So we have blood vessels, and the tiniest blood vessel is a blood capillary, which is very close to every cell. So an artery can bring blood to an organ, and then that artery will branch into tiny little capillaries, here like blood vessels called capillaries. And here in your blood capillary, you can see something very important, learners. These are called what? Your red blood cells. Does anyone know the other name? We learned it in grade 10. Another name for red blood cells is called erythrocytes. And do you remember the pigment that it has? It's called what? Hemoglobin. So here's your red blood cells in your blood capillary. And this little pouch here, this is called an alveolus. We're going to do that in detail next week. This alveolus is like one air sac of a lung. It's called an alveolus. It's an air sac. It's like a bunch of grapes. If you look at a bunch of grapes, the whole grape is like the whole bunch is your lung. And then that one little round structure becomes your alveolus, okay? And this alveolus has a very, very thin wall made up of a squamous epithelium, very, very thin. So thin that when we inhale the oxygen, can you see? It's able to move very rapidly through the thin wall of the alveolus, through the thin wall of the blood capillary into the blood. And then, so this blood here now is going to carry the oxygen. Here's the blood capillary, right? And then the blood is coming from where? From different parts. It's coming from different parts of the body, and it's going to be carrying carbon dioxide. So the blood has more carbon dioxide than the lungs, because remember, CO2 is coming from the cells, whereas oxygen is coming from the air. So now there's going to be a high concentration of oxygen where? In the alveolus. So oxygen will move along a diffusion gradient from the alveolus of the lung through the thin membrane to the red blood cells. And then oxygen is going to be carried to the cells for respiration. Now, then after respiration, what's coming to the lungs now? There's a high concentration of CO2 here. High concentration of CO2 in the lung. Then there's a diffusion gradient. And then the high concentration of CO2 means CO2 is going to leave the blood to go to the endothelium, to go to the squamous epithelium, into the lungs and out. So basically, oxygen and CO2 move along what we call a diffusion gradient, okay? So here you can see how gases are being exchanged. So when we breathe in the oxygen, then the oxygen must be exchanged between the alveolus and the blood. After respiration, there's high levels of CO2 in the cells, which the blood capillaries remove and bring it to the lungs. And then the CO2 is going to move from your blood to your lungs to be exhaled. And that oxygen was inhaled. So here you can see gaseous exchange. Gases are being exchanged from the alveolus to the blood and from the blood to the alveolus. Okay. And then you ask yourself, what is that oxygen needed for? Respiration. Where is the CO2 coming from? After respiration in the cells. And then here is your blood capillaries. Can you see? Here's your red blood cells. What is the shape of your red blood cells? Yes, they are biconcave discs. They're biconcave. They don't have a nucleus. They're not true blood cells because they don't have a nucleus. And the reason is, in place of the nucleus, it looks like a plate, okay? Like where there's a nucleus, now the nucleus is removed. So there's a bigger surface area to carry more oxygen. That's why our red blood cells are disc-shaped like that. Here in the hollow, there's more space for hemoglobin to carry more oxygen. So here's your red blood cells, and you can see after respiration, carbon dioxide is moving from the cells to the blood. Okay, and then you're going to also find that there's oxygen in your blood, and your oxygen in the blood is going to go and diffuse into your cells. So you see that after respiration, CO2 is going to move into the blood to be carried to the lungs to be exhaled, and oxygen is going to move from the blood into the cells for respiration. Right, and now you're going to see again this little picture here. This is going to be your blood capillary. This is going to be your alveolus wall. You can see CO2 is moving from the blood to the alveolus to be exhaled. And you can see oxygen is moving from the outside to the lungs to the blood. And what is separating the two is two very, very thin membranes. The thin membrane of the alveolus and the thin membrane of the blood capillary. So thin that oxygen and carbon dioxide can diffuse through it. Okay. Now, learners, what's very important is that for any surface to exchange gases, there must be 5 requirements that must be satisfied. And you need to know how these 5 requirements are satisfied in every organism. How is it met? So let us look at the requirements that you need for maximum gases to be exchanged, for maximum CO2 to move out of the body, for maximum oxygen to move into the body. A surface must have 5 requirements. So the first one is the requirement must have a large surface area. Okay, so let's see. A large surface area to volume ratio allows enough oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse. So there must be a large surface area. Means from all sides, oxygen must enter. From all sides, CO2 must leave. Right. So large surface area to volume. So compared to the size, compared to the size, which means the volume, let's say like that. So this is a very small space, maybe 1 centimeter. That's space, right? But if you look at it, it has a surface on this side, on that side, on that side, and that side. So compared to its size, which is just like that, you see the size, né? The actual size. So compared to its the surface area, look at the surface. This is a surface, that's a surface, that's a surface, and that. So there's 4 surfaces. So the 4 surfaces are much greater compared to the actual volume, that size. Can you see? So therefore, the surface area is greater than the volume that it occupies. So it may occupy a small space, but in terms of its actual surface, it could be 4 cubic centimeter, but yet its space is just occupying 1 centimeter. All right, so it's standing on 1 centimeter volume, but along the surface, it's 4 sides. So the surface area compared to the size is greater. And that means that there's going to be maximum diffusion of gases, gaseous exchange. So there must be a what? A large surface area. Then for any surface to have gaseous exchange, that gaseous exchange surface must be thin to allow substances to move in and out. When substances move in and out, we say that that surface is also very permeable. Okay, so if something can go through a membrane and move out of the membrane, it means it's allowing to go through. It's called permeable. But now, For it to be permeable, that surface has to be very, very thin. It cannot be thick. So it must be thin and permeable. Okay, it cannot be thick and impermeable. Okay, so the next thing, it must be moist. Moist. That surface cannot be dry. Why? Gases can only dissolve where there's moisture. So if something is dry, gases can't go through it. So the surface must be moist. So let's see. When something is thin, diffusion can occur more rapidly and efficiently. That means rapidly and to its maximum. If the surface area is thin and permeable, not just thin, but thin and permeable. So something can be thin, but nothing can go through it. So it has to be thin and permeable. Okay. Moist, oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse when they are dissolved in water. We say that oxygen and carbon dioxide can only go through something if it's dissolved, in solution form. Okay, then the oxygen can go through. So remember now, in winter, when our lungs can get very dry, that is also a reason why people cough a lot in winter. The air is becoming very, very dry. And when it becomes very dry, germs and bacteria become more active. All right, so you find in summer it's the air is more moist due to the rainfalls, and our lungs are nice and moist, and you find oxygen moves even faster into our lungs. So when the air is dry, it also irritates your nose and your throat, because the throat becomes dry, the membranes become dry. Okay, so once there's moisture, gases can diffuse through very, very easily. So it must be moist. All right. Then the surface area must be protected. Okay, children, the surface area must be protected. Something must protect it. And how is our lungs protected? You can see our lungs are not exposed. Can you see somebody's lungs? No. It is where it's hidden in our chest, our thoracic cavity, behind our ribs. So the entire rib cage, our bony ribs, protect the lungs and the heart. So it's very, very protected. So all gaseous exchange surfaces need protection from injury, and also it needs protection from drying out. It mustn't dry out. Another name for drying out is called desiccation. All right. Then it must be well ventilated. That means it must be in such a way that it must allow for oxygen to enter and allow for maximum movement out of the lungs or out of the surface of CO2 to move out. So it must be well ventilated. It means that ensuring that oxygen-rich air for terrestrial organisms and oxygen-rich water for aquatic organisms are continuously brought into contact with the gaseous exchange surface. So there has to be a mechanism to allow air to move in and to allow air to move out. So that's what we mean by ventilation. Somehow air must come in and somehow air must move out. And that is actually the breathing mechanism. Okay. Also, that surface area must be vascular. What does it mean? Vascular means there must be an efficient method to transport the oxygen from the surface. That means you must transport the oxygen from the lung or from the gaseous exchange surface to the cells, okay? And then from the cells back to the gaseous exchange surface. So there must be a transport mechanism, because what's the use of oxygen coming in and sitting in the lung? It must move to the cells, it must move to the heart. So you must have blood vessels. So vascular simply means a blood system. Okay, so let us summarize now. What are the 5 requirements or 5 main requirements for any gaseous exchange surface? It must be large, it must be thin, it must be moist, right? Large, thin, moist. It must have a blood transport system. It must have a blood transport system. And it also must be protected. That's the main 5. Large, thin, moist, it must have a transport or vascular system, and it must be protected. Okay, those are the 5 main points. Well ventilated means there must be a way in which air can come in and out. But the 5 requirements are: in a large surface area, it must be thin. It must be thin for gases to diffuse. It must be moist for gases to enter in a dissolved form.
Recording stopped.
It must have a blood capillary for the transport of gases, and it must be well protected so that the surface does not dry out and does not get damaged due to mechanical injury. All right. So now let us look at this diagram, which explains a few things here, learners. So here we have a nasal cavity. Now, how are we going to allow air to come through for ventilation? We have nostrils. Nostrils are openings which allow for you to breathe in and breathe out. So that is a ventilation system. You have nostrils to allow as an opening for the air from the outside to come inside your body, into the lungs. Right. Then you have here now, over here, from your nostrils, air enters there, and then it moves down the pharynx, which is your throat, is called the pharynx. Then it will move through your voice box, which is called the larynx, and then it moves into your trachea. That's your windpipe. Okay, and from your trachea, like that, that's your trachea with little cartilaginous rings. Then from your trachea now, which is like an upside down Y, that's the stem of the Y called the trachea. And the 2 branches here are called the bronchitis. Yes, bronchus, 1 bronchus, 2 bronchi. And these are the 2 tubes which enter into each lung, like that. Okay, so here is your lung tissue. Here's your bronchus, and your bronchus will subdivide into small branches like a tree, which we're going to call bronchioli. So that's your trachea, that's your bronchus, and these finer tubes are called bronchioles. And there you have a little muscular sheet here, which is called a diaphragm. Please know the spelling. It mustn't be diagram. It's diaphragm. So this PH is pronounced as an F, and then RAGM, RAM. So diaphragm. Okay. Here you can see now we have blood vessels, vascular. Our lungs, if you breathe against a glass or in a cold day, you can see steam coming out. It means that our lungs are kept moist. Moisture comes from the water you drink. So it goes to the cells. So our lungs are moist for easy gaseous exchange. It has small air pouches called alveoli, which gives it a large surface area. Right? It's protected inside the body by the rib cage. That's protection so that it doesn't get damaged, it doesn't get dried out. Okay, you have nostrils for for ventilation. And each alveolus, as I indicated at the beginning, it has a thin wall called a squamous epithelium that is thin. Okay, so here you can see how humans satisfy the 5 requirements. Let's go to the next slide now. This is ratio of surface area to volume. Okay, so let's see. All organisms rely on gaseous exchange for survival. In other words, we cannot just only eat to survive. We've got to breathe to survive. Why must we eat? We need glucose to get to the cells. Why must we breathe? We need oxygen to get to the cells. How can the oxygen move from the outside to the air? We have nostrils to take it in from the nostrils to the throat, the pharynx, through the voice box, which is your larynx, through your trachea, to your bronchi, to your lungs. Okay, so we have a ventilation system to take in air. Then all the cells will release CO2. It moves from your lungs to your bronchioles, to your bronchus, to your trachea, right, to your voice box, larynx, to your pharynx, and out through your nostrils, the opposite direction. Okay, so we have a ventilation system. And then so that is our ventilation system that brings oxygen and in and CO2 out, and we need oxygen for survival. So whether you are a simple amoeba or a very complex human being, we all need gases such as oxygen. Right, unicellular means just made up of one cell, and multicellular means made up of many cells. So you've learned in grade 10 about the amoeba, or you learned earlier in this year when you did animal biodiversity that the single most simple organism on earth was just an amoeba with no particular shape. It has a cell membrane and a nucleus, and it changes its shape all the time in order for it to move. It didn't have eyes or nose or legs, but it was the simplest, just one cell, unicellular. Whereas if you look at locusts, earthworms, humans, donkeys, cows, they all are very complex. They are made up of many cells. So whether this statement is saying whether you are unicellular or multicellular as a human, we all need gases for survival. So the amount of CO2 absorbed and the amount of CO2 released out of the body depends on the ratio of the surface area to volume. So surface area to volume. Okay, so this is how you work out what is the surface area. So as I said, learners, that can be a one surface where a cell rests, but that one cell can have four sides. So looking at its volume, the size it occupies, the space it occupies is volume. Space that it occupies is called volume. Look at it looks like just a small number, just one side. But look at the surface, the side and that side. So that is the surface area compared to the size it occupies. The surface area is larger. It has that side, it has four sides compared to just the one side. Okay? So if the surface area is larger compared to the volume, it means the surface area is going to be big. So if you take, it occupies a small space, see, 1 centimeter. Let's just say it occupies a space or volume of 1 centimeter. But if you look at all the surfaces here, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 surfaces over that small volume, which means it's giving you a surface area of 4. That means the surface area is bigger. The more the surface and the smaller the space, the bigger the surface area. And the bigger the surface area means, that means from all sides now, oxygen is going to be able to enter. Now, ratio of surface area to volume. Here is a single cell. Look at this bacteria. Remember you did bacteria under biodiversity of animals, and bacteria is also unicellular with a flagella. And look at this bacteria, it is getting so, it is actually looking and saying, I am so tiny, and now look at this human being. He is such, it's like a monster, okay? He's magnanimous, very, very big, almost made up of what is it? 37 trillion cells. Not million, not billion, but 37 trillion cells can make up one human. Whereas this bacteria now is so astonished because it just has one cell. So this is unicellular and this is multicellular, very, very complex. So what does this mean? Surface area is the combination of all the exposed surfaces of the organisms. Now let's say you take a human being, right? He is only occupying that surface, which means that his volume, the space he's occupying, is much smaller, right, compared to all his cells, isn't it? His space is much smaller. So in other words, he's occupying a volume of, let's say, if you look at it, the length and then the height, okay, the height like that. So he's occupying a, but compared to his number of cells, there's too many cells. So the cells are to 37 trillion cells. So his surface area, can you see, is going to be much bigger. So now because he is a bigger complex organism, he cannot have oxygen diffusing only through these surfaces like that. That surface is too small. It's not going to be large because oxygen cannot diffuse through the exposed surfaces. what did we say exposed surface is? The sides exposed to the air. Look at this bacteria. Compared to its size is smaller, but its surface is bigger. Can you see that? The surface, it can get oxygen from all sides here, but yet its volume is very small. But look at this one's volume. This one here, right, man has a small surface area. Very little air can enter compared to his volume. So therefore, he has to have a special respiratory system. Whereas in a unicellular, you need oxygen to diffuse by oxygen to enter by diffusion. But for a human being, because his surface is very small compared to his number of cells, his surface is small compared to the number of his cells. Here, the surface is big because it's just one cell, so the surface is big. So in the unicellular, what's happening here is that the surface area here, all sides, is big compared to his volume. But in humans, his surface area is small compared to the number of cells, 37 trillion cells. So therefore, he cannot allow, oxygen can't just enter through our skin or from our head and our hands like that. We need a special system because we have too many cells compared to a bacteria or an amoeba. So we can't just allow oxygen to enter from our surface. Our surface is too small compared to our volume of cells, compared to the cells that we have in our body. So we'll need a special system called the gaseous exchange system, which is made up of your lungs, your trachea, your diaphragm. All that must be involved to take in oxygen. So what does surface area mean? Surface area is a combination of all the exposed surfaces of an organism, like that. Therefore, the volume is a space taken up by the same organism. Volume means a space. What is volume? The space taken up. So this space taken up is very small compared to the amount of cells we have, okay? Whereas this surface area is quite big compared to its space. Therefore, the surface area to volume ratio would be the amount of surface an organism has relative to its size. So our size is very small compared to our number of cells we have. And when our size is smaller, right, our size is smaller than the surfaces, it means we need a special system. But when your size is small, but the surface the surfaces from which oxygen can enter is quite big compared to the size you occupy, then you don't need a special gaseous exchange system. So let's look at this here now. Let us look at a simple thing like a square. Okay, so this is now a small little cube, and it has 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by 1. So it has a surface on that side, this side, this side, this side. Right. So here now, you can see it's only resting. The space it's taking is just 1 centimeter. But look at all the surfaces that it has. You can see 6 surfaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and at the bottom, 6 surfaces. But the size it's occupying is 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. It's only 1. So its volume is 1, but the surfaces are 6. So this one here, you find that the surface area to the volume is greater. Can you see that? Let us look at this square. This square now, right, is much bigger than that one. But now it's going to occupy 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. It's going to be 8. So the size it occupies is 8 cubic centimeter. And now look at the surfaces. The surfaces is going to be from here to there is 2, right? Okay, and you're going to see here now it has 6 surfaces, and then you're going to see there's 24. The surface area is going to be 24 because you're going to have what? 6 sides. 6 sides. 1. That's one side. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 sides, and by 4 it's going to be double the size now. 6 times 4 is going to be 24. So 24 divided by 8 cubic centimeters is going to be 3. So here, the surface area to volume, it's only going to be 3. Here, the surface area to volume is going to be 6. So the smaller the organism, compared to the smaller the organism, the size is small, but the surface is big, then diffusion can occur. Here, the bigger the organism, but its surface area is too small. Can you see? It's 3. That means it needs a special respiratory system. And here again, they're showing you now all the cells. Like this is quite a small cell, so oxygen is going to diffuse from all sides because the surface is greater. And here the cell is bigger, so there's not going to be enough oxygen for such a big cell. So you need a special respiratory system. Okay, you can see every 1 cubic centimeter provided oxygen by 3 cubic centimeters. Surface area is not so sufficient because that's equal to 3 and that's equal to 1. Here you're going to see that compared to its size, from 6 parts oxygen is going to enter, but from here this isn't enough oxygen that's entering, so you'll need a special respiratory system. So the question will be, they will ask you in the exam, learners, for example, compared to an earthworm compared to a human, does an earthworm have a special respiratory system? No, because its volume is smaller than its surface area. Okay, its volume, the size that earthworm occupies, is smaller than the surface because it's cylindrical. So diffusion of gases occurs to the earthworm. But a human being, the size we occupy is smaller compared to the number of cells we have, and therefore humans will need a special ventilation system, a special gaseous exchange system like nostrils and larynx and trachea and bronchi and bronchioles. Okay, so now you're going to look at even for a plant. Even plants need gaseous exchange. For oxygen to leave it, for oxygen to leave the leaf and for carbon dioxide to come into the leaf, also the surface area must have 5 requirements. So this is the internal structure of a leaf. It is flattened top to bottom, which means it's dorsi-ventrally flattened, the leaf. And remember, leaves photosynthesize and release oxygen. So oxygen must go into the air. And remember, plants take in our carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide must go into the plants. So gaseous exchange is different in plants and animals. What's the difference? We take in oxygen and we breathe out CO2. Plants release oxygen and they take in our CO2. So plants are actually going to release oxygen, right? They're going to release oxygen and they're going to absorb CO2. Whereas human beings, what do? The human being, they are going to release the CO2 which is taken up by the plants, and they're going to inhale the oxygen which is released by the plants. So the oxygen released by the plants is going to inhale by humans, and the CO2 exhaled by humans and animals is going to be taken in by the plants. So that's gaseous exchange in plants, and that's gaseous exchange in a human. And you can see the internal structure of the leaf. Now let's see, how is a leaf suited for gaseous exchange? First of all, it has a large surface area. Okay, it's flattened from the top to the bottom. So compared to a small leaf, its space is small, the space of volume is small, but the surface from which oxygen can leave and the surface from which CO2 can enter is much greater compared to its size. Right, so therefore it's dorsi-ventrally flattened, therefore it has a large surface area for gaseous exchange. Also, a leaf is very thin, it's not thick, okay? It's not thick like a mat. A leaf is thin, so that oxygen can leave very quickly and CO2 can diffuse through very quickly, so it's thin. Right, thin walls. And then you have moist, okay? You find that always leaves have a cuticle to trap the moisture, to ensure that leaves are always moist so that it doesn't lose too much of water, right? So at the bottom of the leaf now, There's no cuticle. It's shaded. So where there's shade, less water is lost. So it's moist so that the oxygen can enter from the air, or the CO2 can enter the leaves from the air in a dissolved form. And then oxygen will also go into the moisture and from there leave into the air. So it's moist. Water vapor, right? There's water vapor in the air, and that water vapor will allow for rapid diffusion of gases. It's well ventilated means that always the leaves are exposed to the air, so the air is in direct contact with the leaf. The leaf is in direct contact with the air, so that gaseous exchange is easy. Protection, you find the cuticle. Here's a waxy cuticle that protects the leaf on the top, right, prevents it from drying out. Also, you find there's a single layer of cells shaped like bricks that also protects the internal tissues like your xylem and your phloem, okay, your chloroplast, which is actually releasing oxygen and taking in CO2. So you find your cuticle and epidermis protects your leaves. All right, so that's protection. Transport system, once you find there is oxygen here that's made in by the chloroplast, then there's small little air spaces that allow for gases to move from the cells to the space to the cells, and out through the stomata. From the stomata, which is an opening, into the cell, from the cell to the spaces, and that's how they move. So the air spaces serve as a gaseous exchange or a transport system in leaves. All right, the air spaces, the intercellular air spaces. Okay, so that is how leaves are suited by the 5 requirements. Large surface area is dorsiventrally flattened. Thin, the leaves are flattened from top to bottom, which means there's very few cells, and therefore it makes it thin for easy diffusion of gases. Then the cuticle in the epidermis protects it. Then we have a transport system, which is actually specialized air spaces that allow gases to move in and out. That is transport. The leaves are well protected by a cuticle and epidermis, and then the leaves are in direct contact with the air for gaseous exchange, and also the bottom of the leaf is moist because it's in the shaded part, so that gases can enter in a solution form. Now let us look at the earthworm. Okay, so here you find this is the earthworm, and if you look at the space it occupies, the volume, right, the volume is quite small, because if you take the surface, this earth, so this pen, for example, now this pen is just occupying that space, but compared to the surface all around, that surface is bigger than just that space. So anything that is cylindrical has a larger surface area compared to the volume or space it occupies. So earthworms are cylindrical, and that's what gives it a large surface area. The skin of the earthworm is very, very thin, single layer of cells. So gases can diffuse through very easily because it has a single layer of cells for gases to move through. Earthworms, the skin is moist. You'll never find an earthworm moving around in winter when the air is dry. Always they are found in water, or when there's rainfall, they will come out of the soil, and they'll actually move in the water. So at all times, the surface or skin of the earthworm is always very moist, right, for gases to move in. It's well ventilated means the surface area of the earthworm is in contact, direct contact with the air. Also, you find protection, the earthworm itself, right, it's able to, it also has like it can move very, very fast to protect itself, right, and it always moves in water. It will never ever come out when it's dry or wintry months. So therefore on its own it's able to protect itself, because earthworms will never come out of the soil in winter. They are protected by the moist soil deep in the ground. Right. Transport systems, earthworms are pinkish in color because the skin is richly supplied with blood vessels. So as soon as the oxygen diffuses into the earthworm's body, the blood vessels will transport the oxygen to all cells of the body. And then also CO2 from the cells will be removed from the cells to the blood, and then they will diffuse out of the earthworm's body. So the skin serves as a gaseous exchange system. The skin or the surface is sufficient for gaseous exchange in an earthworm. It does not need a special gaseous exchange system like the humans. Okay. Let us look at the locust. Okay. Now with the locust, you find there's a locust here. You all know locusts are grasshoppers, right? Now they, remember when you did the locust, it had a open blood system. So if you look at the earthworm, it has a closed blood system. That means blood is confined to the blood vessels, and the blood vessels will take the oxygen and move it throughout the cells, and the CO2 will move by the blood vessels to the cells. So they have a blood system. But with the locust now, the blood is not confined to blood system, it's confined to a space. So in that blood, in the space, there is blood called a hemocoel. Okay, hemocoel is a cavity filled with blood. And then now, how does the locust actually breathe? For a locust, you find here you have to have special openings, right, called tracheoles, little openings on the side from which oxygen will enter, right? And because now the locust, the skin is dry, the locust cannot breathe through its skin like the earthworm, because the locust has a very hard, which means it's quite thick, a hard, dry exoskeleton. So locusts cannot breathe through their external surfaces. They need a special gaseous exchange system, and they have openings on the side, and then that leads to tracheoles, which are little tubes, and from there the oxygen will move through these openings into these tubes and into the blood space, and then the blood will actually move around in the space and transport oxygen to all the cells. So yes, locusts need a specialized gaseous exchange system. Why? You find that their surface, their volume, right, their volume is quite small, and the number of cells is too much for the space it occupies, and plus its skin is hard. So in terms of thin, it does not satisfy the requirement. Their skin is, their exoskeleton is thick. Okay, moist, you find that the earthworm, the locust doesn't have a moist skin. Therefore, it will need a special respiratory system. If you look at well ventilated, yes, it will have special tracheoles to transport the gases from the air to the blood space. So it is having a well ventilated system, right? Protection, the exoskeleton protects these tracheoles, and transport system, the gases are in direct contact with the tissues via the blood space. Okay, so there is a blood system to transport the gases that come in from the outside. It is well protected by the hard exoskeleton. It is well ventilated because it has special tracheoles that lead to the openings of the locust on the outside, but it's thin does not be satisfied because the earthworm's exoskeleton is quite thick and hard. And also you find there's small cells compared to its volume, and therefore it needs a special respiratory system, which we have by means of the tracheoles, okay, which look like little bronchioles. Okay, so locust does not breathe through its skin. Its skin is thick, hard and dry. Therefore, it does not breathe, it cannot have gaseous exchange occurring by diffusion. Now, let us look at a fish. Right, how is the gaseous exchange system in a fish? So, you find that bony fish, okay, they have little gill, their respiratory system also, they cannot breathe through their skin because their scales, although and plus all the cells of the fish are not in direct contact with the water, which has oxygen dissolved in the water. So they have special things called gills. Okay, so you find the little slits on the sides of the fish called gills, and those slits have richly supplied with blood vessels, so that the dissolved oxygen in the water will enter by diffusion, right, go through into the blood vessel. So there's a transport system, and from there now, so there's thin membranes. It has blood vessels present. The gills are protected by the bony cover. Water is taken through the mouth and forced through the gills. So water is taken to the mouth, and from there, from the water that's in the mouth, oxygen will diffuse to the gills, from the gills into the blood, and from the blood to all the cells in the body. So here now, diffusion does not occur to the fish body, but occurs through a special system called the gills and the gill slits. So they need a special system, just like the tracheoles in the locust, special respiratory system, lungs in the humans, special respiratory system, gills and gill slits in the fish, special respiratory system, and therefore gaseous exchange cannot just occur by diffusion, okay? Because there's scales, and also you find that the volume is going to be the surface area is greater. No, the surface area is going to be smaller. So compared to the fish size, the fish size is going to be greater compared to the fish size, or the volume is going to be greater compared to its surface area. So its surface area means all the cells in the fish is much more compared to its size, and therefore it needs a special system called the gills. All right. Let us now look at mammals. The mammals are lions and goats and humans, right? Anything that has 2 mammary glands, and they are very, very big. So a lion, if you look at it, the number of cells of a lion and a human compared to a single bacteria, we are multicellular. And because we're multicellular, you find that our volume or our size is much greater than our surface we occupy, or the surfaces through which gases can exchange. That surface is going to be too small to supply oxygen for the number of cells that we have. So we as mammals need a special respiratory system, which is the lungs. Okay, so now how is the lungs in a human or in a mammal going to satisfy the 5 requirements? So let us see. Lungs have many, many alveoli. So our lungs have many. So here's your trachea, and here's your bronchus, and there's your lungs. But these lungs are made up of millions of little pouches called alveoli. So there's lots of air sacs. And because of lots of air sacs, lots of surface area. So many alveoli gives it a large surface area for oxygen to enter. Then each alveolus or air sac has a very thin membrane for gases to diffuse through very easily. The inside of the alveolus is always lined with moisture. It's always moist for gases to diffuse in a dissolved form from the alveolus to the blood. So it's always moist. See, alveoli has a layer of moisture, and you can see that evident when you are breathing out on a cold day. You can see the water vapor, which means that our lungs is lined with moisture. Okay. Well ventilated means we have a nostril, and we have a tube called the trachea and the bronchi, which is able to take air from the outside to the lungs, and from the lungs to the outside. So that is a ventilation system. So we have a very well ventilated system because we have many cells, and lots of oxygen needs to reach the cells. You find that our lungs, because we are multicellular and complex, our lungs is very well protected by the rib cage. We also have a heart to take the oxygen from the lungs and pump it to the cells, and we also have our blood that takes the carbon dioxide from the cells and pumps it to the lungs. Right, so let us look at these questions now, learners. Animal 1 and Animal 2. So Animal 1 has a surface area of 3,5. That means all the space through which oxygen must diffuse through. So the surfaces exposed to the air is 3,5. but the volume is 7,7, which means that the space it occupies is 7,7. And here in animal 2, the surfaces from which oxygen can enter is going to be 6, and the volume is 8. Okay, so the volume here is bigger, but the surface is smaller. So which animal has a higher surface area compared to volume? Remember this is the formula. We're going to have surface area to volume. Né? So which animal has a higher surface area? Let's see. Animal 1. Surface area to volume to find out the surface area. So you're going to put surface area is going to be 3,5 centimeter over volume is 7,7. And if you work it out, it gives you a surface area of 0,5 centimeter cubed. So that's the surface area, 0,45. Here now, animal 2, your surface is going to be 6, your volume is going to be 8, and if you work it out, it's 0,75. So it seems like animal 2, right, it occupies a bigger space, but the surface is small. So this one here, can you see? It occupies a bigger space compared to 7, right? But then it has a higher surface area. 0,75 is higher than 0,45. Why? Because the surface here along which oxygen can diffuse is 6, whereas the surface here is 3,5. So if the surfaces are bigger than the size, you see the surface is 6 compared to its, so although it may seem like it's 8 centimeter, but there's more surface compared to this one. This one is occupying almost 8, but its surface is smaller. So therefore, if you work it out, that animal 2 has a larger surface area. The size from which oxygen can enter is greater. Okay. And then we're going to go to the next one. In which animal will oxygen reach all the cells through the process of diffusion? Remember we said if an animal has a larger surface area, that means oxygen will diffuse more efficiently. So animal 1 was what? 0,45, and animal 2 was 0,75. So isn't animal 2 has a bigger surface area, so more space or more area for oxygen to enter. So it's going to be animal 2. Give a reason why animal 2 will have more oxygen that will reach its cells by diffusion. It has a higher surface area to volume. The surface area to volume is greater. Okay. Now, let's look at the same question again. What systems are in place for an animal with a small surface area to volume ratio to ensure that all cells receive oxygen in the shortest possible time? Now, learners, let us analyze this question. What are they trying to say is that if you compare the two animals, right, we know that in animal 2, efficient gaseous exchange can occur to all the cells here by diffusion because the surface area is greater than the volume it occupies. But we know in animal 1, the surface area here is smaller compared to its size. It's only 3 compared to its size. So the surface through which oxygen can enter here is not enough if it's going to enter only by the surface. So animal 1 now, because the surface area is small compared to its volume, its surfaces is small compared to its volume, how will that animal compensate to ensure that lots of oxygen can reach its cells? Because by diffusion, it's not enough. So how is it going to ensure that lots of oxygen is going to enter the cells if its surface is so small? It's going to have a very special respiratory system. Right. These animals will have a special respiratory system like the lungs or the trachea. And it will also have a very good circulatory or transport system like your blood space or like your tracheoles with little branching tubes, or like your bronchus and your bronchioles, and lots of blood capillaries to transport the gases. So animals with a small surface area compared to a volume will have a very well developed respiratory system and a very well developed circulatory system, blood transport system. Like we have a heart and we have blood vessels to ensure that the oxygen coming from the lungs will be transported to every single cell of the body in the shortest period of time, because the heart must pump it at a speed in a very short space of time so that all the cells can get the oxygen for respiration. So we cannot breathe through our skin. The surface is too small compared to our number of cells we have in the body. Right. Predict what will happen if an animal with a small surface area to volume does not have a specialized system in place for oxygen to reach the cells. So let us assume, learners, that we were to breathe through our skin. What will be happen? First of all, our skin is too thick. We have too many cells. So our skin does not satisfy the requirement of being thin. So then, so it won't be able to diffuse. So number two, our skin is not moist like that of an earthworm. So gases will not be able to dissolve, because gases can only enter in a dissolved form. Our skin is dry. It's not as moist as an earthworm. So we can't breathe through our skin, okay? Two, our skin is exposed to danger. We get scratched, right? We get hurt, we can fall. So we're exposed to mechanical injury. Our skin is not protected compared to our lungs. So that's another reason why we can't breathe through our skin. Right. Our skin does not have enough surface to provide just your little finger. Compared to that size, you have millions of cells in your one finger. So that skin surface is not enough for oxygen to diffuse through to your cells. So therefore, we need a special system, right? It's in direct contact, but not well enough to reach all your cells. So that our skin is not well ventilated, okay, not protected, not thin, not moist. Okay, we don't have enough blood vessels on the surface of the skin to transport the gases. Therefore, we need a special heart, a special circulatory system, and we need a special respiratory system called the lungs. So they say predict what will happen if an animal with a small surface area, like humans and lions, we have a small surface area compared to volume, does not have a special. So if we don't have a lung, what's going to happen? We have a lung because we can't breathe through the skin. So what happens if we could not have a lung? What happens if the fish could not breathe through the gills? What happens if the locust did not have the tracheal system? Okay, that means all the cells will not receive sufficient. It will not receive sufficient oxygen, and the cells will die, because some cells will get oxygen and some will die. And if the cells die, it means the organs will also fail. And if the organs fail, that means that animal won't be able to move, it won't be able to see, and eventually the animal is going to die. And that's what happens with people with cancer. They may have a lung, or people with lung cancer, they die very, very fast. Why? Because although there is a lung, and because the lung is cancerous, not all the alveoli are going to get oxygen to transport it to all the cells. So because the person has lung cancer, parts of the lung is already dead. It's damaged with abnormal mitosis. So only a little bit of oxygen is going to reach the cells. And then other cells are also going to die in the body because they're not getting enough oxygen, because the cells in the lungs are dead. So if the cells in the lungs are dead, that means not sufficient oxygen will be transported to the heart. The heart is not getting enough oxygen to transport to other cells. Then those cells in the other organs like the brain, the stomach, right, the heart, they also will fail. The kidneys, they'll fail because they're not getting enough oxygen. So therefore, people with lung cancer die faster than any other kind of cancer, because oxygen is the most important ingredient for the cells to get energy to survive and for the organ to work. So therefore, we need to ensure that our respiratory system called the lung functions well, and therefore smoking, right? Breathing in polluted air, like if we're always inhaling smoke from felt fires, from the burning of wood, that means we are inhaling all these toxins from the air. We are damaging our lungs because our lungs need that oxygen to fulfill cellular respiration in all our cells. So predict what will happen if we don't have a lung. Our cells will not get enough oxygen and the cells may die. So let's see. Name 4 structural requirements of an efficient gaseous exchange system. So I'm giving you 5 or 6. From the 6, the most important 4 are: it must have a large surface area. The surface area must be thin and permeable. Children, don't forget, it's not just large. It must have a large surface area. It must be thin and permeable. The surface must be moist. The surface must have a blood transport system. Instead of saying vascular, you can say a blood transport system, or even just say transport. It must be well protected and it must be well ventilated. Now, our lungs satisfies all these 6 requirements, but the 5 most important of any gaseous exchange system: it must have a large surface area. That surface area must have a thin membrane which is permeable. That surface area must be moist, and that surface area must have a good blood transport system, and that surface area must be well protected. So those are the 5 most important requirements for an efficient gaseous exchange system, and it's satisfied in the skin of the earthworm, in the lungs of a human, in the tracheals of a locust, and in the gills of the fish. Okay. So let us look at this question. Here is the human respiratory system, which is a specialized system because we cannot breathe through the lungs. We cannot breathe through the skin. So next week, we're going to go into detail looking at inhalation and exhalation. So learners, here, let us look at the parts of our gaseous exchange system. So this one here is the larynx, which is called a voice box. It is protected by a cartilaginous structure. It's made up of cartilage. Then you have this very important structure B called the trachea, which is the windpipe. Common name is windpipe, and it is supported by cartilaginous rings, which are C-shaped. So you get, here's your trachea, but this trachea is supported by C-shaped cartilaginous rings. They look like that, actually, like that. And then your trachea is running through it like this, okay? So these C-shaped cartilaginous rings ensure that as we inhaling and exhaling, that the trachea does not collapse. It ensures it's keeping it open at all times, even when we are swallowing food through the esophagus. Because remember, the esophagus and the trachea are very close together. So when we're swallowing food, the food bolus mustn't go and protrude and injure the trachea. So the trachea is well protected by these C-shaped cartilaginous rings. So B is pointing to the trachea, but that little ring on top there is a C-shaped cartilaginous rings that ensure that the trachea is kept open at all times. Right. Then this branch here, C, is your bronchus, which is going to divide into smaller tubes. Can you see F? F is your bronchioles. So F is your bronchioles. G is a small air sac called the alveolus. H is very important. You're going to learn about it next year. H is your diaphragm. It's a muscular wall that separates your thorax, your chest cavity, from your abdomen. Remember, that's your abdomen and that's your thorax. So your thoracic cavity, which is your chest cavity where your lungs are found, and your heart, there's the heart. and this is the intestines, and the stomach is found in your abdomen. Your diaphragm, which is dome-shaped, is separating the thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. That's your diaphragm. It's very important. It plays a very important in inhalation and exhalation. Okay. And here's your heart, which is actually pointing to the left. And that is why, if you look at the lung has two major lobes. So the left lung, can you see, in comparison to the right lung, your left lung is smaller because it's giving space for the heart. So the heart points, our heart points to the left, and therefore the left lung must be a little smaller to accommodate the heart as it pumps blood. And the heart is our circulatory system, ensuring that the oxygen reaches the cells very fast. So here we have a right lung which has three lobes. One, you can see that's one lobe, two lobes, and three lobes. And the left lung has just one lobe and two lobes, because the heart points to the left. And you can see our ribs here. You can see this here is our ribs. It is protecting our lungs. And our lungs is well ventilated. We have a nostril to bring in air, and we have these muscles to push out the air through the lungs. So these little bones here are your rib bones, and between them you're going to have your intercostal muscles. So you can see, learners, here, E is an intercostal muscle. This is an so this white here is your white rib bones. Here's your bone, your ribs. So this white is your rib bone, and that E is your intercostal muscles. And we breathe in and out. Our rib cage moves out and in because of our intercostal muscles can contract and relax, causing the rib cage to move up and out, up. Okay. So here you have the black is your intercostal muscles, your F is your bronchiole, your G is your alveolus, and your H is your diaphragm. So, which of the following parts is represented by A, B, and G? A is what? Our larynx. B, our trachea. G is our alveolus. A is the larynx, and then B is the trachea, and then G is the alveolus. Give the letters of the parts that represents the breathing muscles. And I told you what's the breathing muscles? It's going to be H and E. E, which is intercostal muscles, and H, which is your diaphragm. And this is always tested in matric. Name the breathing muscles involved in taking oxygen in and removing carbon dioxide. The breathing muscles in a human being is the intercostal muscles and your diaphragm. Okay. Name the two breathing muscles involved in gaseous exchange. So here we had to identify the breathing muscles. So that was E and that was H. You identified it by giving the letters only. Now they want you to name it. What is the breathing muscles? It is H, the diaphragm, and E, the intercostal muscles. Same diagram, different questions. Name the part that ensures part B remains open and not collapse during breathing. So what's part B? It's your trachea. And what keeps it open and prevents it from collapsing is your C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Okay. State one reason why the left lung is smaller than the right lung. Why is the left lung smaller than the right lung? Because it accommodates the heart that points to the left. Name the double membrane that protects each lung. So each lung, here you can see it, learners. Here's the lung, and it's protected by a double membrane. And that membrane is called the pleural membrane. So normally, children, what happens is that when people smoke a lot, one of the diseases that they can get is called pleurisy, right, where the membranes become very sticky with the nicotine. And also emphysema, because the nicotine actually damages the air sacs or the alveoli, and the alveoli like have holes in it, and that disease is called emphysema. So remember, our lungs is very well protected by a double membrane, and the lungs are kept moist also because of the double membrane, and it's called the pleural membrane. Okay. And let's go again there. Let's go to the next slide. Right. Name the air sacs which form the lung. Right, the air sacs that form the lung. Sorry about that, learners. The air sacs that form the lung is going to be our alveoli, okay? So our alveoli are the ones that's going to form the air sacs, or the air sac is called the alveoli. Name the epithelium forming the structure named above. So what is the name? Do you remember you learned in grade 10 about the cuboidal epithelium, the squamous epithelium? Right. Now the squamous epithelium is what makes up. So if you look at an alveolus, this little wall here like this, that makes up our alveolus, right, like that. So this is your thin single layer of squamous epithelium where oxygen is entering and CO2 is leaving. That's the alveolus, that whole structure. But the walls are made up of what? Squamous epithelium, very, very thin. So thin that oxygen can diffuse very, very rapidly through it. Name the two mechanisms of breathing. What are the two mechanisms of breathing? Remember, we said at the beginning, breathing is a mechanical process. You can see it happening. It's not chemical. So the two mechanisms which you're going to do in detail next week, it's called inhalation and exhalation. So the two mechanisms of breathing to ensure air enters the lungs and air leaves the lungs. It's inhalation and exhalation. And remember, learners, this is a mechanical process. Okay. Name the 3 respiratory diseases associated with the lungs. What disease is associated with the lungs? It is bronchitis, right? When you get a flu and you're coughing a lot in the mucus, it means your bronchioles are inflamed, and because there's some foreign germs that are inside your bronchioles, then they're going to irritate the membranes of your bronchi. They're going to start producing mucus to trap the dust and to trap that germ. So the mucus becomes thick and green and yellow, and you suffer from bronchitis. Then if you're exposed to a lot of cold, and now your lungs, your actual alveoli is also becoming infected, then you have pneumonia. So it's not only now confined to your bronchus, but even your bronchioles, the air sacs are becoming infected. You suffer from pneumonia. And then you can also suffer from emphysema. Emphysema is when a person smokes a lot, and now the nicotine damages your air sacs. It damages your alveoli, and the alveoli has small holes in there. And when there's holes in there, you find the gradient between the air outside and inside is not much of a difference. So the people who have emphysema cannot breathe in because there's a hole. So air can't come in and air can't leave, and that's how they eventually die. So cigarette smoking or smoking any kind of a substance will damage your lung. Explain 2 reasons why humans need a special breathing or respiratory system compared to an earthworm. Humans, their surface area is small compared to an earthworm. Therefore, not all cells in a human are in direct contact with oxygen compared to an earthworm. Humans are far more active and require more oxygen compared to earthworms. And therefore, they will need a special respiratory system. So learners, what's very important, just to recap, right, is that you need to know the 5 requirements for gaseous exchange. You must know that. How is each one satisfied in the earthworm, in a locust, in a human, and in a fish. So how are the 5 requirements satisfied, and why is it that the fish, the humans, and the locust, right, need a special respiratory system compared to the earthworm or the bacteria? All right. So why can't we breathe through the skin? Okay, in terms of cells and in terms of the requirements. And you also need to know the difference between breathing, respiration, and gaseous exchange. And you need to know that this involves inhalation and exhalation. Respiration involves the mitochondria, and therefore it's a chemical process. And that gaseous exchange simply means cellular at the cell surface and the gases. Okay, the blood in the cells and the cells in the blood. Okay, blood in the cells, cells and blood. Blood to the cells, cells to the. So that is gaseous exchange, and you need a well-ventilated system. So you need to know the difference. Breathing is mechanical, inhalation, exhalation. Respiration is mitochondria to release energy using glucose and oxygen. And then you need to know the gaseous exchange system in all the above organisms and how the requirements are met in these organisms, and why is it that animals with a small surface area need a special respiratory system, whereas animals with a large surface area compared to volume, they have diffusion through which gases can occur. With that, learners, thank you and see you next week for the next lesson on gaseous exchange.